Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me in the studio are the former media advisor to two prime ministers with 20 years of experience in the IDF's intelligence community, Colonel Miri Eisen, and both a former Labour Party Knesset member and former head of the Mossad intelligence agency, Major General Dani Yatom. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Today we will discuss the emerging power structures of the Middle East that is unfolding after the ousting of ISIS from Raqqa and the Kurdish forces from Kirkuk. So first we turn to the Islamic State capital of Raqqa that has finally fallen to Syrian forces backed by the United States. This event marks a great turnaround in the battle against the Islamic State, but though the capital in Iraq and Syria has been reduced, ISIS fighters remain across the rest of the world. To defeat the threat, it's going to take efforts around the world.
The war is morphing. You're going to see more actions in Africa, not less. You're going to see more aggression by the United States toward our enemies, not less. You're going to have decisions being made not in the White House, but out in the field. And I support that entire construct. So the rules of engagement are going to change when it comes to counterterrorism operation. We're going to move to status-based targeting. So if you find somebody who's a member of a terrorist organization, then we can use lethal force. They don't have to present an immediate threat.
Major General, I'm going to turn to you first. What will be the greatest challenge in the fight against ISIS and other jihadi networks like ISIS in the coming months, years?
ISIS is not going to disappear. ISIS is an idea, as almost each and every of the terror organizations are derived by ideas. And to wipe the idea from the heads of the terrorists, it's almost impossible. We have to continue, the free world have to continue and to chase those terrorists. What they will try to do now is to carry out terror attacks all over the world, either in Syria or Iraq, but also in Europe and the United States, in order to show that they still exist. And in addition to it, they will try to build a new land stronghold in the eastern part of Libya.
So you think that they're going to move to Libya, not Africa, in Egypt or
no?
Or not Libya
as a matter of fact, there is already an enclave of ISIS in eastern Libya. Right. It is far, not more than 400 kilometers by the sea from the shores of Europe. So it allows the ISIS via the routes of the refugees that are coming from Libya to hide also terrorists and to infiltrate terrorists into Europe. And in addition to it, of course, they will enforce wherever they will reinforce, wherever there are elements of ISIS, like, for instance, in the Sinai.
So moving on that vein, what does it take to overcome an ideology, as you said, especially if the centralized command, which was in Raqqa, is now gone?
ISIS was never centralized command in the sense of a hierarchy that there's the guy sitting in Raqqa and everybody does what he says. It's always been much more dispersed. They pledge allegiance, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of local leaders. And we still see that some of these local leaders exist, both on the southern Golan Heights on the Syrian side. There's still an enclave of the Islamic State inside Sinai. So on two of Israel's borders, we actually have two enclaves like that have local leaders. For example, the one that is in the Golan Heights, the local leader has changed rather often as of late. One was killed, another was killed, a third was killed, yet they managed to continue to exist there. So I think that what we will see are much more of the local leaders, in addition to trying to find a place to base it, like in Libya. At the end, the name itself, Daesh, the idea itself comes back to the Iraqi-Syria area. It can go off to Libya, it can go to all other additional places, but I think it still will want to have a strong foot on the ground in the areas that are part of its name, of that Islamic State of Iraq and Syria.
I see. But then who will be the driving force? Because Major General, you mentioned earlier that they'll try to stay relevant by committing attacks and atrocities abroad, by continuing to do so. So what which group, which affiliate should we be looking out for that will be perpetrating these attacks?
I'll just start and step in and say that little bit, not even little, of competition that we've been seeing over the last 3 years between Al-Qaeda, which is a name that most Americans know, and I don't think that they've forgotten. 9/11 is Al-Qaeda. And the Islamic State that everybody is so worried about right now, I think there will be more of a subtle competition, one that won't matter to us. These will be killing and those will be killing, mostly overseas in those Western different places, but I think they'll be doing it for different reasons. I think the Islamic State will be doing it much more to get people to come and join them, and Al-Qaeda will be doing it much more to attack the different Western sites to show that their way is the correct one.
So who should we be more afraid of, ISIS or Al-Qaeda?
No, I think that the name does not make any difference as long as it is a terror organization with the aim to kill the infidels, which are also moderate Muslims. And almost each and every of us, either we are Christians or Jews or even, as I said, moderate Muslims, the world will have to continue and to join forces and to hold hands together in order to fight those terror organizations. Either it is in Somalia, or in North Africa, or in Libya, or wherever. What really made the difference between the situation of ISIS 2-3 years ago and the fact that it is defeated now is the fact that finally the world understood that it had to join forces in order to overcome the problem. And this will escort us, so to speak, in our lives for many, many years to come. We will not get rid of the terrorists. There are slippery cells that might come to an action, and they will continue to build cells, terrorist cells, wherever they will be able to do it.
So two follow-ups to that, actually. First of all, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, we haven't seen him, I think, in at least several weeks, months even. If he is dead, because there were some reports that he was dead, but then the United States is contradicting that, saying that, no, we haven't found any evidence to support that. Does it matter if he's dead? I mean, you've said that certain different command outposts of ISIS have switched dozens of times, no?
I think, as with many different questions, Aaron, it depends who you ask. I don't think it makes a difference. I think that Baghdadi took a step, but that we're way past the point of no return. Meaning the step that was taken at the time of establishing Islamic State, of turning it into something real and having it exist as a place where it had laws and places where people could live that way for a while, has gone way beyond Baghdadi. Baghdadi is gone, they'll find somebody else in his stead, just like they would in an Islamic State if he would die in any other way. Having said that, you always wonder about the strength of those leaders in all of these organizations. In this case, I don't really think it'll make that much of a difference if he's there or not.
So, okay, so we've driven ISIS to the brink in Iraq and Syria. Will the coalition forces continue to fight in Asia, in northern Egypt?
I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes, because they already breached the gap of understanding that only by joining forces, universally wise, globally wise, it is possible to defeat, I don't say to wipe off, but to defeat those organizations. Will it be Al-Qaeda or Daesh, ISIS, or maybe a third one which will emerge all of a sudden somewhere? This is exactly what's going on with the fight against Al-Shabaab, which is operational, very deadly in Somalia, and some other organizations in North Africa that some are affiliated to Al-Qaeda and some others are affiliated to Daesh, meaningly Al-Qaeda and Daesh continue to kick and to be alive. So coalition of any type will continue to exist.
What you said earlier about the cells that might slip through the fingers of the coalition forces, ISIS essentially was born out of a vacuum that was born out of the Syrian civil war. The Syrian civil war isn't really over, and now there's also this kind of vacuum currently in the same area. Are we going to see a rise of a new terrorist organization? Is this just a hydra that keeps sprouting two heads when we cut off one?
Firstly, there are many terror organizations. It is not only Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They are the most well-known ones. But in Syria, for instance, during the wars since 2011, many dozens of terror organizations were operating and are operating, and thousands of terrorists, close to 100,000 terrorists, were and are still operating in Syria. So you have so many names of terror organizations. By the way, all of them have at the end the same goal, and the goal is to build on the remnants of the modern world a new Islamic Caliphate.
I actually am gonna slightly look at it in a different way, I think, than what Danny just said right now. Terror organizations existed before the Islamic State, before Al-Qaeda. And terror organizations were most definitely and still are backed by different types of countries where everybody likes to talk about Iran, but I'll remind everybody that once upon the Soviet Union was one of the main supporters of terrorist organizations. And if you ask about the coalition and what's going to happen now, and as if they work together, I don't see it so easily. I don't think that Russia of today, I think that what Russia is doing both in Syria against the Islamic State has to do with Russia, not necessarily the people of those countries or the terror that's going on.
Yeah. All right, well, unfortunately, we have to move on to our second topic. So, the recently voted on Kurdish state hasn't even really yet been formed, and already it's falling apart. Iraqi forces have blown through and retaken the Kurdish city of Kirkuk. Add to that the city fell largely unopposed because most of the Kurdish Peshmerga forces left without a fight. It seems now that what started off as a determined push for independence has become closer to a distant dream. Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani is quickly running out of options, as many analysts apparently predicted.
I think the writing was on the wall for Masoud Barzani in terms of overreach, this whole idea that he was going to somehow create a Kurdish state just by holding this referendum when you have four very powerful states who are going to oppose it.
The PUK were part and parcel of this. They supported him, they were calling for independence, and I think it can be safely assumed that if the KDP, if Mr. Barzani knew that the PUK would just withdraw from Kirkuk like the way they did, perhaps he would have not trusted the PUK, because the concern seems to be in intra-Kurdish politics in Iraq, that the PUK acted against the wishes of the KDP and acted on the side of the Iraqi government. So I think Mr. Barzani was calculating that the PUK would stick with him after the independence, and especially when Kirkuk was going to be under attack.
Colonel Eisen, I'm going to start the next topic off with you. Was there ever going to be a Kurdish state?
I didn't think so. 100 years to the Sykes-Picot map, to decisions made in World War I. I don't see that Kurdistan as an independent state is any closer. But I don't think it's something that you can ask us or the Kurds. I think that one of the first things that we need to talk about is the city called Kirkuk. Everybody talks about Kirkuk. Kirkuk is one of the first places on earth that during World War I already, they knew that there was this black bubbly above ground called oil. And when you talk about Kirkuk, you're talking about oil. That isn't necessarily about the Kurds or Iraqis or Iranis or Islamic State. This is about something which still has importance in the world of today. Second aspect about Kirkuk is that Kirkuk has a majority of Kurdish-speaking people, but in the very odd borders of present-day Iraq, Iraq after the United States left it after 2011, I mean even from before that, from 2003, that area of Kirkuk was supposed to have been under Iraqi rule, not the self-autonomy of the Kurds. So there's a lot that's going on here on what are the lines of the game. And Kirkuk, to me, is a lot more about oil and less about Kurdish independence.
How would you agree?
I think that the Kurds deserve a state, not only an autonomy, but an independent one, as many other people in the Middle East and elsewhere, but I don't see it going to happen very near in the future due to the fact that, as Miri said, Iraq is against it, Iran is against it, Turkey is against it, and not necessarily the Americans. Even the Americans were against the referendum.
Well,
But I think that at the end there might be a possibility, because I don't know how long Syria will remain undivided. I don't know how long Iraq is going to remain undivided. There is a possibility that Iraq will fall apart to three enclaves: the Kurdish enclave, the Shiite enclave, and the Sunni enclave. In such a case, yes, the chances for the Kurds to obtain an independent state will only become higher.
So, did you want to add something?
I just want to emphasize here that the one player that we don't talk about as much as I think we should when it comes to this not happening is Turkey. Yeah. And I think that if I had to give a bottom line, it's the world. Every single country in the world will have to choose. I can think that the Kurds deserve independence. But as an Israeli, I would say to the government of the State of Israel, you get to choose. Are you going to have a relationship with Turkey, a country of almost 80 million people at the crossroads of the world? Or are you going to have a relationship with Kurdistan, a country of 5 to 6 million people, not at the crossroads of the world? And I say that because you can't have both. You choose Kurdistan, you have just told Turkey something very clear. And I think that that's part of the things that people need to be aware of.
Miri, you know that in politics you can maintain very good relations with Turkey. Depends, by the way, on the other side, because we would like to even deepen our relations with Turkey, but not necessarily this is the attitude of the other side. And at the same time also to speak, to talk about the fact that the Kurds deserve it, but not necessarily to see it happening right now.
Well, so we've heard some reports back in September 2017, Netanyahu went on, publicly saying he supported not only the referendum, but the establishment of a Kurdish state, said they would be a great aid and friend of Israel in the region. And a lot of people drew up parallels between Israel's birth and Kurdistan. So now we see Netanyahu quietly going around and bringing support for this state. Now let's look at the United States. The United States has been training and arming both the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces. And now they're saying, as you said, they went against the referendum, but they're pro-dialogue. What is the United States' responsibility here, and what is Israel's?
Welcome to the challenges of the Middle East. I love the way that the guy before was saying the PUK, the this KK, and I was like, really, anybody's going to follow all of the different acronyms just of the Kurds. The Middle East is made up out of countries that were done by outer forces. In that sense, the only one where really there was a self-determination requirement that the people wanted their own state was the State of Israel that was only established in 1948. But the other states of the Middle East, the state we call Syria, the state we called Iraq, and the state we used to call Syria, these are borders that are made up of all sorts of people. And I want to say, after 6 years of the civil war in Syria, that I hear voices today in Syria I never thought I'd hear before, that they prefer bad Bashar, the bad dictator, rather than continuation of the death and destruction. And I say that in the idea of the Kurds because the Kurds are not a united people. There are Sunni Kurds and there are Christian and there are Jewish Kurds. The Kurds are both in Syria. All of northern Syria
also Shiites.
And Shiites.
Shiite
there
Kurds
are,
as well.
in northern Syria, all of northern Syria today, we call it Syria, but it's actually Kurdish, Arabic speaking, but also Kurdish in an area called Syria. So when we look at the map of the Middle East, perhaps we have to draw new lines, and we don't have to be so afraid of defining these new lines. Maybe it isn't just the falling apart or the dividing of Syria in that sense, but making new lines that make more sense today, more geopolitical sense today.
I see.
Let me, can
yeah,
I
please,
refer to
please,
it?
please.
I don't think that drawing new lines between countries today and in the time that I can look to is something realistic. Nobody will agree. No one will agree that even 1 square centimeter of its own country will be transferred to another country. But what might happen is that the situation will bring Syria to have a central, very, very weak control, a central administration, and around this central administration, few the Kurds, the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Christians, that will have each of them a semi autonomy, something like that. It might be fall apart, but taking into consideration Russia, for instance, Russia is not going to leave the area. I think the Russians are there not for vain. They're going to build their own airfield. They're going to build their own maritime port.
By the way,
in Syria. Do you think Russia and Iran will be doing
by the way, the Iranian
together?
as well. And as long as Iran is in intervention in Syria, Russia will not stop it, because Russia is against Iran taking over Syria. And the Russians will be there in order to make sure that the Iranians are not taking over Syria, are not having such an influence, which will be the most effective influence of anybody outside Syria on Bashar al-Assad or the one which will succeed him.
All right. Now, on that note, it's time for the good word, for the positive note to end this on, the silver lining. I'll actually let you begin. Just a quick sentence or two on what we can look forward to, something positive to take away from these situations.
Well, I think that for Israel, and I'm looking as an Israeli, the positive issues are the fact that our enemies are getting more and more divided, and they fight each other. Will it be in Syria or in Iraq or wherever? I hope that out of this situation, maybe will emerge an opportunity to being able to have a dialogue with the Palestinians once there is a reconciliation between the PLO and the Hamas. We will have with the Egyptians and with the support of the Americans and others, a new, maybe a new opportunity to being able to ease the situation here in the Middle East.
Colonel Eisen?
I think that the defeat, the physical defeat of the Islamic State in eastern Syria and the northern portion of Iraq of today are things that for us as Westerners are things that will make us happier. We don't tend to remember that until 6-7 years ago, until the Islamic State, also 4 or 5 years ago, there was always terrorism. We didn't like it. It's never been nice. It's not easy, but it's something that we can live with. And I think that the defeat of the Islamic State allows us, the West, to feel not just the strength of our militaries, but of our way, of our ideals, of what it means, that we need to remember again why we're fighting this fight in that sense, how horrible they are and what they're doing to mankind in general today. And I think that we need to remember that because we're going to be living with this for years to come, what our ideals are, why we're fighting this. It isn't about the oil, if I mentioned that before. Right. This really is about the way of life of mankind today, and I want to hope that this is the beginning of the right step.
So it serves a good symbol, a good purpose in that sense. All right, well, unfortunately, thank you both for coming. All right, that is all the time we have today for this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Major General Yatom, Colonel Eisen, thank you so much for coming in again. Thank you out there for watching and tuning in. See you next week, and shalom from Israel.